Okay, a few tips for writing folk or rock songs or pop songs or sort of the more traditional type of guitar or piano-based music, focusing specifically on chord progressions. So these are the backbone of most songs, a series of chords that repeat usually in sets of either 4 or 8. And usually a chord progression has 3 to 4 main chords and maybe 1 or 2 others that appear every once in a while in the bridge. But here's a great example of Let It Be by the Beatles. And you can see we have G chord, the D chord, the C chord, and the E minor chord. And if you look at first glance, it kind of looks like it's not the same pattern. But if you look a little bit more closely, you realize it's actually a two-line pattern that repeats twice over for the verse. So there's a chord progression. So chords consist of 3 notes, though sometimes more or less, from the scale. So I have another video about scales, but these are a series of notes that occur in different modes. Usually we use major scales, which sound happy, or minor scales, which sound sad. But there's actually a whole slew of scales that you could use. But for simplicity's sake, here's a C major scale, which you can see uses only the white keys on the piano, which is really convenient, makes things pretty easy. And then goes up in a series of what we call whole or half steps. So to tell how big a step is, you can just count the number of keys on the piano. This is why piano is so useful for learning music theory, is because you can see the music theory right there. So we have a whole step between the first 2 notes. So that'd be 1 half step and then another half step to make a whole step. And then you see between the next 2 on a half step and a half step makes a whole step. And then between E and F, we have a half step. So you'll notice there's no black key here. And then we have another whole step with black keys in between all the rest until the very end between B and C, there is another half step interval. So this pattern of whole, half, whole, half seems kind of boring, seems kind of inane, but that's actually the pattern you would use to move this major scale to any other key. So I could say start on a G and I would do 2 whole steps, right? So I got half step plus half step, so G A, and then half step plus half step would be B, and then we do just a half step, so you go right to C there. And then you continue whole, half, all the way to the end. You'll notice we start on a C and we end on a C. That's what's called an octave, that 8th interval right there. I put down the numbers for all these notes as well, because it's sort of how you kind of hear about them referred. So 8th would be that octave. A lot of times you hear people talk about 5ths, which in this case would be the C and the G. The 5th is a major part of the chord. And then the 3rd part would go right in between. So that's why I put all the numbers there, just so you kind of get used to thinking, oh, 3rd, oh, that just means the 3rd note in the scale, or a 5th, oh, the 5th note in the scale. Sometimes in jazz chords you see 11th, so you just keep counting past this, right? Just write the notes, D, E, F, G, keep counting upwards. So chords are usually made in triads out of 3 notes, and they tend to use thirds. So in this case, we see 1, 2, 3 would be our 3rd, and then 1, 2, 3 is another 3rd. So this is a C major chord, super common, super popular. We could hear what it sounds like. So you can play it all together, or you can do what's called an arpeggio or arpeggiated, just by playing each note of the chord individually. And that's a really good technique for like writing background music. Instead of just playing, you do, mix it up. So that's our C major chord. Go back to our PowerPoint here. There we go. And just a reference for how to play it on guitar as well. So the root is the bottom note of the chord. And then you can look at the other numbers to figure out the 3rd of the chord and then the 5th of the chord. So the 3rd of the chord is super important. This is what's going to define whether the chord is major and happy sounding, or if it's minor and kind of sad sounding. So here's our C major again. And so to make it minor, I take the third and I move it down a half step. You probably already hear that sounds a lot more ominous, a little bit kind of creepy. So there's your minor. And if you wanted to count the number of half steps, that could be pretty useful, right? We got 1 half step, 2, 3 half steps for a minor third, and then 4 half steps for a major third. And if you wanted to count all the half steps up to a fifth, you could also do that. And then you throw that third in there to really designate the tone of the chord, right? So that's like the most rudimentary chords, right? Major and minor chords, basically determined by that third. So you can use notes in the scale to build different chords that start on different pitches. So we build the chords by using every other note, because putting all the notes together kind of sounds a little harsh, right? If I tried to play C, D, E, sounds really bad. It says ASD here because I'm typing on my keyboard actually, which is also a piano. So that doesn't sound really good, right? So if you space things out a little bit more, it sounds better. So I can take that same spacing and move it up to the next note. And we have a D minor chord here. And you can move it up again. Move an E minor. You can move it up to F. That one sounds a little bit happier, huh? That's F major. Happy or sad? Hopefully you hear that it's major. Another minor chord before our really crazy one. Oops. Why can't I play this? Okay, well, if I played that note, it would sound harsh. It would sound. So that would be our 7th chord. Where'd my PowerPoint go? Here it is. So right here, that's 7 diminished. So in all of these chords, we had our 5th that was staying the same, right? The C and the G, the D and the A, the E and the B, etc. And then that middle note was changing from either minor to major, and that was really changing the sound, right? We had a major, nice, happy sound, and then the third went down. Sounds sadder, right? This would be the major version. Oops, went down an octave, sorry. There you go. And so the idea is usually you're just changing that third. In a diminished chord, you actually change the 5th. So I'm going to take this 5th and lower it, flatten it. That sounds kind of scary. Diminished chords are usually often music, or it can be used as a nice little passing chord to move to something. Oops. Let's see if I can do this. Where should we go from here? Maybe we'll go. That's pretty nice, right? Okay. I just went down to a C major. A nice trick when you're trying to find chords is to try to make kind of stepwise moves instead of jumping around a lot. But there's our diminished chords. Most songs use the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. So in the key of C, that would be C major, F major, and G major. And then the minor 6 is also used quite frequently. So we could look at Let It Be in terms of the different chords in the scale, right? So Let It Be is in the key of G. So here we have our 1 chord is G major. Our 4 chord would be C. Our 5 chord would be D. So you could look here and you'd be like, okay, that's a 1 and that's a 5. Okay, cool. E, that minor 6, and then back to the 4. So you can look at the chord progression here, right? 1 5 6 4 1 5 4 1. Really, popular song, really beautiful song, but super simple chord progression. And you can, move these chords around, change their order, and find something that you like. And don't be worried if you accidentally write the same chord progression as someone else, because there's a lot of songs that use the same chord progressions. That's okay. It definitely happens. I mean, some bands even use their own chord progressions at the same time. Even Bob Dylan's done that. A note here that in this case, the 2-line chord progression ends on the 1 chord. That's really nice because since we're in the key of G major, ending on the G chord really makes us feel like we're at home. And if you tried to end on the 5 chord, you might not feel so much like you're resolved. So we could just try to play this. I'm going to play it in C instead of G because it's a little bit easier. 1, 5, 6, 6, and then 4. And then I'm going to go here. And then I'm going to stop. And if I stop, you'd probably be really upset with me because you want this chord to go somewhere else. You want it to go here, which is our home key, C major. So, I mean, you can be intentional with how you choose to do that, right? You might choose to end on that home key so it sounds resolved, or you might choose to end not resolved and really make your listener feel like they're not at ease. So just some tips for figuring out chord progressions. First step is choosing a key. If you're new, C major is such a great key on the piano or on guitar. C and G usually have pretty easy chord shapes. And then just mess around with the order, right? Just play the chords in different orders, see if you find something that you like. Try to change the length or the timing of the chords, hold some of them for longer, some of them for shorter. And try to listen for this in songs that you enjoy too, right? What are they doing with their chord progressions? Changing the timing of the chord progressions can actually be really interesting. So one thing that I would do in one of my songs is I play the exact same chord progression for the verse and the chorus, but in the verse, the chords just go by twice as fast as they do in the chorus, where I hold them for a little bit longer. And even though it's exactly the same chords, it sounds just like totally different, taking a little bit longer that way. If you want to get like that really nice rock and roll sound, or punk uses a lot of these types of power chords. So power chords omit the third. So you'll notice there's no note in between here. And so that third usually tells us if it's major or minor. In this case, there might be some other instrument that tells you. But emphasizing that 1, 5, and 8 gives you a really nice, full, heavy sound. Maybe I'll actually use a guitar sound. Yeah, that's right. Sounds really better on an actual guitar too. But if you're trying to write a song, maybe that's a little bit more on the heavier hard rock kind of side. You might do more of power chords. In this case, they're doing lots of driving eighth notes, which is kind of more like punk rock type of music. But yeah, a good option. And another tip is to sort of move them around using whole steps. So we can see here we have 5, which is the 5th fret on guitar, and 7. And there's a 6 in between. And if you played that 6th note, it probably wouldn't sound very good. So sticking to those slightly bigger steps can be pretty helpful. You could try to actually look at what the chord progression is. And you might figure out that it's actually 1, 4, 5, 1. Whoa, so crazy. Really common chord progression. In fact, it's the most common chord progression in like a 12-bar blues. Just a 1, 4, 5, 1. Classic. Can't go wrong. Check out my other videos for tips on scales and other ideas.